Hello readers, I'm Amy and I'm your nonfiction feminist. Today I'm discussing what is quite possibly the worst Stephen King book ever. Or at least the worst Stephen King book that I've read so far. And that is Rose Madder. I did not enjoy reading this book. I actually almost gave up on it, but at that point I was like 3/4 of the way through it and I'm figuring, I just need to finish this thing already. Get it out of the way, say that you finished it, do a ranty review. So here we go. My ranty review. As usual, I am going to go through premise, plot, world building, and character. So I can kind of get a thorough idea of this book and everything that went wrong. So, starting with the premise. Woman escapes from abusive relationship. Abusive husband runs after her. That's kind of it. I will also, down below, I will link my try a chapter tag for Stephen King. This is actually the book that I picked for that tag because it had the most interesting beginning. It had the strongest beginning. And strong beginning does not a good book make. So, for plot. The very first chapter, which I read in the try a chapter tag, started off with a miscarriage. Rose Daniels has a miscarriage due to the abuse that she has suffered by her husband. That is a really strong way to start off a book, so I liked it, I picked it, I went for it, didn't go so hot. She does not actually leave him after that miscarriage. It goes on, I think, another 14 years, or maybe, no, another 9 years after that, because they were together for 14 years. 9 years after this event, she's been abused multiple times throughout this 9 years. And one day she wakes up after having a bloody nose the night before and she's trying to change the sheets. And she notices a spot of blood on the top sheet and she just feels exhausted. Her back hurts, her kidneys hurt, she has blood in her urine from the abuse that she suffered, and she's just looking at these sheets. If she changes the top sheet that has the spot of blood on it, she has to change the bottom sheet too, otherwise he'll get angry because the sheets won't match. And she's just staring at this spot of blood and thinking of how exhausting it's going to be to have to change all of this. And something just clicks right there, and she leaves. It just clicks. She doesn't think about it. She just goes. She's in a new city, and she goes to a pawn shop to try and trade her ring, which ends up it's worth absolutely nothing. So instead, she ends up trading it for a picture that she sees, which you can kind of see the picture frame here, that just immediately captures her attention. And throughout the book, whenever she goes on to getting her own place and hangs up the picture, she sees the picture changing. And in the rest of the book, you also have the husband chasing after her, and she learns that he's in town, tries to escape him. All of that stuff happens. My problem with the plot. It's essentially a story of a woman running from an abusive relationship and her husband running after her. And I feel like he just put his finger on a spot in the story and wrenched in a little bit about the picture. And he picked another spot and wrenched in a little bit about that picture. And the picture definitely comes into play at the end of the book, but throughout the book it has nothing to do with the story whatsoever. The picture is just kind of there doing weird things. We never learn the history of this picture. We never learn if this picture had effects on other people's lives, if it led to people's deaths, who really painted it, why this picture is so mysterious, why it is changing. It's just kind of there doing weird things, and she interacts with it from time to time. The fantasy felt like an afterthought for this book rather than a part of this book, and that's a problem. It wasn't integrated very well at all until the end, and at that point you don't really care that much about the picture anyways. World building, that also kind of plays into this and the main issues that I had with it. The world of Rose Daniels was built pretty well. Like, she's escaped, she doesn't know what's going on, she's trying to build this new life in this new city, she's still very afraid of her husband. That world is built well. The pictures world, not built so well. Again, we don't know anything about its history, why these things happened with it. Also, the husband, which I'll get more into in character. But essentially, you generally need a screwed up backstory for your screwed up characters. And the husband does have a screwed up backstory, but it's one of those backstories where we're told the backstory rather than feeling the backstory. And considering the level that this book goes to freak you out, I would have preferred to feel the villain rather than just read the villain, if you get what I mean. So, with that, I'm going to go ahead and skip forward to character so we can talk more about the husband, the villain. He was my biggest issue. Like, the world building was kind of a disaster in this book, but the husband just... The husband, whose name I don't remember because I've read a lot of books, the husband is one of those villains who is a villain because he's a villain. He is a bad guy. It's kind of it. We get some explanation in that his family, I think it was his dad, beat him and molested him from time to time. But again, we're told this, but we don't really spend any time in his backstory. We're not given any situations where we can really feel the pain that he is feeling and get a sense of why he went on to become the person that he became. There's no depth to this villain, and I love depth to my villains because I love a good villain, and this is not a good villain. Also, another huge issue I had with the book is that you can be a villain without just being gross, I guess. I don't know how else to say this. I'm not going to list them off, but I learned more racist terms from this book than I have probably ever heard in my entire life. And I'm like, hey, what's this word? What does this word mean? Where does this word's history come from? I don't understand. There were words for lesbians, there were words for Mexicans, there were words for black people. Like, it's just gross. Like, you don't need to include all of these horrible racist terms and all of this disgusting abusive imagery to get across the point that your villain is the villain. Like, I guess what I'm trying to say is there are certain types of villains that I like and certain types that I don't. And this book was not for me. I was sick of the racist terminology. I was tired of hearing the details of how he abused people and his obsession with biting people and wanting to tear things off and being homophobic. Like, that is not my type of villain. My type of villain has a backstory that you get to feel. He's got reasons for doing the things that he does. It just... Perfume? Loved that book. That's my kind of villain. You get in his head and you get descriptions of the smells that he smells and his reasons for wanting to make women into perfume. And The Woman in White, you kind of get a feel for who these villains are, why they're such terrible people, like what exactly they're doing, what their devious plan is, but it leaves out all of the horrible terminology and all of the disgusting details, and I don't want to be here for that. That's not my kind of villain. So, definitely the worst Stephen King book that I have read so far. This book kind of solidified for me that Stephen King, in my experience, is a very isolating author. I will either absolutely love the Stephen King book that I'm reading, or I will absolutely hate it. There have only been one or two books where I can really say I was kind of meh, but even in not really knowing how I feel about it, I still really leaned more one way or the other. So, I don't know how the rest of my Stephen King experience is going to go from here. I definitely want to read more of him because I recognize him as a very good writer, whether or not I like what he writes. This Rose Madder was early on in his career, and it's definitely not his best book. But it also brings up the point that in Stephen King's books, and I will also put Daniel Green's video down here, it's a 13-second video on things that he doesn't like so much about Stephen King, and I agree. When it comes to the really gross, abusive, sexual, racist, homophobic imagery, that's the kind of stuff that I don't really feel like you need in order to get your point across in the book. So, If you've read Rose Madder, please tell me down below how you felt about it, if you agree or disagree. I want to have a conversation on this, because this was bad for me. I will be working my way through the rest of the books in that try a chapter tag. I'm hoping to have gotten through the rest of them by the end of this year. I don't know. We'll see. Please like, subscribe, and be my friend for more Stephen King content and other books. I will see you in my next video. Bye!